Okay, so what we're looking at are quadratics. We are going to look at using what we call the quadratic formula, okay? Sometimes people call it kind of the minus b formula, just because of the minus b at the start. But the quadratic formula, I suppose, the more technical name that we would use. And quadratic formula can be used with any quadratic that you encounter. So we know what a quadratic equation looks like. It has the three terms. It has the x squared, it has the x, it has the constant. And with any of those, you can use this quadratic formula. Now, the way that it's presented to you, I suppose, in your formula and tables book does help you along a little bit here. So they will give it to you and tell you that this formula is used for roots of the quadratic equation ax squared plus bx plus c. That's really important, okay? So when we're subbing into the formula, we're going to use those a, b, and c. We never sub in the x values into the formula, okay? And that's going to be kind of crucial here. So you can kind of see the formula starts off with x equals, that's where we see x, okay? That's where we see x, nowhere else. Okay, so looking at how we use it or when we use it, I suppose, as we've said, it can be used with all quadratics. So any and all quadratics, even the ones we would have used factorizing for, we can still factorize them, but we'd also be able to do them by the formula. The main thing, I suppose, then is for ones that maybe that we can't factorize or can't factorize easily, we could use the formula then to solve. And we know we would have to use it for definite if they tell us our answer is in decimal or surd form. Then we have to use the formula. So they're kind of telling us, don't bother wasting your time trying to factorize it. There's no point. You're going to have to use the formula here. Okay, and that's kind of the way that we work our way through it here. So let's look at an example. I suppose a good example here, looking at surd form as well and 3 decimal places. We can talk about surd form when we get that far in the answer, I suppose. The first thing I would note here about my question is that it's not in the correct format. Okay, so the first thing I need to do is put it into the correct format. So that's going to mean writing it as 5x squared minus 2x, and then taking my 25 and essentially taking 25 from both sides, or moving it across, changing the sign, whichever way you would think of it there. So taking 25 from both sides means I have a minus 25 on that side there. Now I'm kind of content that it's in the correct format. So the next thing I would do is to set out, I suppose, to label the different points that I have here. So let me just see, I want to make these a tiny little bit thinner. So let's label them here. So if we label this one as A, we can label minus 2 as B, and we will label the minus 25 there as C. We'll label it in the blue maybe instead. Okay, so these are my A, B, and C. And noting what we said from before, that's coming from the formula here, the way that it's presented at the start for me, this ax squared plus bx plus c. So coming from that, and noting that I'm not using x at any point within this. I'm looking at the coefficients of x, the number in front. Okay, so the next thing I would do if I was following kind of my general layout here is to write down the formula. So my formula is minus b plus or minus, and we can talk about that when we come to it also, b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So the next thing we're going to do fairly simply is everywhere that we've identified a letter, okay, and we might even go to the extra step here of actually writing out what each letter is. So a is 5, B is minus 2, so notice that we're taking the sign with us also. C is minus 25, and we're just going to fill all those letters in. The formula starts with minus and then has B, so I will fill in my answer for B, which is minus 2, plus or minus the square root of B squared, so again I will fill in what I have for B, which is minus 2 squared minus 4 times 5 times C, which is minus 25. All over 2 times A, which we've identified as 5 here. Okay, so we've filled in all our values here. At this point, what we could do is simply plot this into our calculator here. Okay, now my philosophy generally would be to work it out a few more steps maybe before putting into our calculator, just to account for any possible issues here. So filling this in, x equals minus 2, that's going to give me a plus 2, because a minus, a negative by a negative gives me a positive. Minus 2 squared, we be careful of this as well, watching the brackets that we've included here. So if we want to even check that on our calculator, I would use brackets to do so, and then square it, and note that I'm getting a positive answer, because again, it's minus 2 by minus 2. For the next one, we'll maybe make sure we take the minus 4 with us as well, just to identify that one, and I get plus 500 all over 10. We'll go a little bit further, so 2 plus or minus the square root of 504 over 10. Now at this point, what I do is I'm going to look for the plus or minus part here. Okay, that's what we're going to deal with next. So we're maybe not used to, I suppose, looking at a formula that would have included this aspect of this plus and minus part. So what we do, or what that represents, is the two possible answers we should have. So we should, I suppose, know at this point a quadratic, it has that squared, which suggests two answers to us. Whether they're two different answers or not, I suppose, remains to be seen, but suggests two answers anyway. And that's going to come from this plus or minus. So we take each possibility here separately. So first of all, I'm going to say that x could be 2 plus the square root of 504 over 10. And over here, I'm going to say that x could be 2 minus the square root of 504 over 10. Now, at this point, I might want to type these into my calculator again to assess whether there is a simpler form that I can use here. Okay, now my calculator is kind of giving me something crazy here, but it does simplify down a little bit. So 1 plus 3 times root 14 all over 5. And we'll have the same thing over here as well, just with the negative in place of the positive. So 1 minus 3 root 14 over 5. So these are my two possible answers. This format that we're writing them in here, including the square root, is what we call surd form. Okay, so surd form is where we have a square root that does not reduce down. So the square root of 9, for example, I suppose technically wouldn't be surd form because square root of 9 can go down to 3, whereas square root of 14 has no kind of smaller value that it reduces down to. There's no whole number square root. So we would consider that to be surd form. Now the question said insert form first and then to 3 decimal places. So by typing each of these into my calculator, being very careful, I suppose, to include that I put in the fraction button first to ensure that everything is written on top of the fraction, all of those little things that could catch us out, and we're going to get 2.445 on the left hand side here and minus 2.045 on the right hand side. So I suppose a lot of different steps, but at the same time, a kind of clearly defined method that we can follow here. So identifying our quadratic in the first place, ensuring it's in the correct format, identifying the different coefficients, filling them into the formula correctly. So what we'll do is we'll have a look maybe at one or two of the questions. I'm going to just look maybe for a specific one here that could give us just something extra to consider. Maybe we'll look at this bottom one here with the 4x squared minus 8x plus 3. Yeah, no, we'll do this one above. So 2x squared plus 7x plus 2 equals 0. So to start off, I'm going to identify each of my letters. So I can see A as 2x squared, I can see B as the 7x, and I can see C as 2 there. And I'm going to just write out each of those to the side here as well, just to help me keep track of everything. I'm noting my signs here as well, but I suppose lucky for us in this case, all the signs happen to be positive. Okay. So identifying my formula next, so I'll write out my formula, minus b plus or minus b squared minus 4ac over 2a. It's just good practice to write out the formula every single time. Minus b, we're using brackets as we substitute, so filling that in, plus or minus b squared, so 7 squared minus 4 times a is 2 times c is 2. All over 2 times a, so 2 times 2. As we said before, we could type this directly into our calculator at this point, but we'll go that little step further just to solve some of it out. 7 squared is 49, minus 4 times 2 is going to be minus 16, all over 4. Let's keep going. Minus 7 plus or minus the square root of 33, all over 4. And again, I might choose maybe to type that into my calculator to see, do I get any better answer here? Did we identify one decimal place here is how our answer was requested. So at this point, let's look at the plus and minus aspect here, taking them to one side. We'll start with the plus, so minus 7 plus root 33 over 4, and minus 7 minus root 33 over 4. Okay, so typing those into my calculator then, again, as we said before, ensuring that it's all typed onto the one line on the top of the fraction there is going to give me minus 0.3139, which to one decimal place is minus 0.3. And in the negative sense here, I might decide to just go back to my my fraction there and change that to a minus to ensure maybe I've typed in the same thing. I suppose being careful, obviously, that in the first place you've typed it incorrectly. And that'll give me minus 3.186, which will round up to minus 3.2. So my two answers, minus 0.3 and minus 3.2. So I suppose really what we're seeing here is the key steps for this formula is ensuring your quadratics in the same format, ensuring you know what words to look for in the question that might tell you have to use it. Those would be your decimal or your surd form, knowing that we can use it for any quadratic, and just following the steps in that straightforward way, okay, labeling your letters correctly, taking them to the side and writing them out, making sure that each of those is just a number, not the x part, filling them into the formula correctly, and then just being very, very careful as you work through it there. Okay, and if you follow all those steps, then you should be able to work through it fairly okay. I suppose the plus or minus then being the last little thing to watch out for.